In this video, we're going to show you how to install a fuel injector on your Ford Mustang located on the top side of your engine. Disconnect your air intake tube. Go right here to the back side, and there's going to be a vacuum hose. Go ahead and just pull that out. Using a flathead screwdriver, want to loosen up the hose clamps at either end. And go ahead and wiggle this off. Set that aside. On the top of the intake here, we're going to disconnect these two cables out of the bracket. You can use a pair of pliers and just pinch these little retainers here. Pull it up. And we're just going to pull up on this here, separating this clip from this little stud. I'm going to spin this up, and there is a barrel connector down here. Just spin that forward and pop that out. Back up here, we're going to do the same thing as we did with the other one. Going to pinch in our little retainers and just wiggle that out like so. Tuck those off to the side. On the side of your throttle body here, there is a sensor right here. I want to go ahead and remove this connector. So on this side here, there's a little tab you're going to push in and wiggle that connector off like so. On the bottom, underneath the throttle body, there's going to be another vacuum hose. Just grab that and pull that out. Now if you follow it up to the top here, it's going to be another vacuum port right on the top. You want to grab that and pull that off. Now sometimes that can be stuck a little bit. Simply grab a pair of pliers. I'm going to be gentle with it, but I'm going to grab that rubber and just gently twist it to break that free. And then we can twist it and pull it at the same time. Just beside that is going to be another sensor right here. Going to do the same here by pushing it on the little tab, pinch and pull, and this should come off. Across the top of the intake, you're going to have 3 ignition wires with plastic retainers. I'm just going to use my trim tool and just gently work that up and follow it over to the other side of the intake. There's another retainer right here. Go ahead and work that up. Right over here, we're going to find another vacuum port. Going to use our pliers on that. And as part of your PCV, you can pop that right out of the valve cover on the other side and set that aside. Using a 5/16 socket and ratchet, we're going to loosen and remove the 2 bolts holding this plate. Now right over here, we have 2 vacuum hoses here, and we're going to remove these. Now these are 2 different sizes, but what I'm going to do is use a yellow crayon and mark this one here. That way there, when we install it, it's going to go onto the same position. Now we're going to use some hose pliers here. Twist that off. Do the same with this one here. Be careful not to break the port. It's going to give you a little more room to work there. On the driver's side of the engine, we have our ignition coil right here. I want to go ahead and separate the coil connector. So push down on this tab, wiggle this connector off. Don't pull on the wires, but push on that connector to work that off. We now want to go ahead and remove the bolts securing the coil to the intake. We're going to use a 7mm socket with our extension. Now there's one more bolt down on the lower back side. Now this lower bolt also has a wire going to it. So you want to pay attention to that. As you remove it here, you want to make sure that we reinstall that afterwards. So we're going to remove that bolt, and you can see right here, there's this component right here. Set that aside. Go ahead and grab that coil. And we're just going to tuck that off to the side as well. On the back right here, we have a vacuum hose attached. So we're going to use our pliers to loosen this clamp and pull that back and pull that hose off. I'm going to slide that clamp back and grab our hose pliers here. Grab that hose and just give it a twist. It's kind of stuck on there pretty good. Twist and pull, and there we have it. On the front driver's side of our intake, there's going to be a couple more vacuum tubes here. I want to go ahead and grab these, twist those off. I want to be careful with these here. These plastic hoses can fracture. I'm just going to twist that out of the way. Now on the top of your intake here, we're going to go ahead and remove this here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use compressed air to go ahead and blow off the top of the engine here to clear out any old debris, anything like that. That way then when we remove the upper intake, just debris or junk doesn't fall down inside the engine. So you can go ahead and do that with whatever type of tool you have. Now we're going to use some compressed air to clean this off. On the top of the intake here, we have this bracket using two 8mm screws or bolts. Go ahead, loosen and remove those. I'm going to go ahead and just throw those bolts back into the intake. They're not going to cause any issues. Just throw them in so we don't lose those. Now with that bracket out of the way, we're going to go ahead and remove the 12 bolts across the top of the intake. There's two right here, there's two on the back, and then there's a series that run up through the middle here. Doesn't matter on the pattern that you loosen these. And on the back side of the intake, there's a wiring harness right here that's held onto the back of the intake with a little clip. We're going to use our trim tool here to go ahead and pop that harness off. On the back side of the driver's side of the manifold, that harness is attached also to the back of the intake. Use your trim tool. Just going to separate that harness from the back. Grab the intake. Lift that up and out. Now right on the top here, there is a gasket. You want to go ahead and remove this gasket. This should be replaced. So go ahead and source that gasket locally. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and disconnect our fuel rail here. There's a little metal retaining clip. We're going to lift up on this clip and pop that off and set it aside. Now normally there's a little bit of pressure in these lines here, fuel pressure. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a towel. We're going to put a little bit underneath here. Now we're going to take our fuel rail disconnector tool here, put that on, and we push this in and it disconnects the rail from the fuel line. Now we're going to push this in. We're going to feel it and hear it undo the locks. Now we're going to put our towel over this here and we're going to pull on that line. All right, so we have the fuel line disconnected. There's a couple rubber O-ring seals right here. I'll go ahead and remove our tool. Now your fuel rail is held in place by 4 8mm bolts. There's 2 here, 1 here, 1 here, and then 2 on the driver's side. Now we're going to be replacing a fuel injector on the passenger side here. So we're just going to remove these 2 retainers. If you want to replace all 6 or anything on the other side, we're going to remove all 4 of these retaining bolts. Now each injector will have an electrical connector on the back side. There's 3 over here, and then there's 3 on the other side. There's just a little pinch tab here. You're going to pinch that and lift up on that harness, separate that. All right, we have all 3 disconnected. Now, like I said, we're just going to replace an injector on this side of the engine. So I'm going to go ahead and lift up on this side here. It's going to separate either the injector from the engine or the fuel rail from the injector. You will have a little bit of fuel leakage here. Sometimes just wiggling this here will get these to release. Now our injectors are kind of stuck in there right now, so I'm just going to use a small pry bar and I'm going to go underneath the fuel rail to a solid piece of the intake. And I'm going to gently bounce this a little bit while I'm lifting up on the rail. I'm going to slowly try and work the injector out of the engine. We can go ahead and rotate this back and forth. Here we go. Get the back one out. All right. and we have this side out. Here's your injectors, 1, 2, and 3. Now I want to go ahead and separate the wire harness from the fuel rail. There's just some retainers on the harness. We're going to use our trim tool and just gently wiggle that off. Do the same on the back side here. That's going to give you some freedom to go ahead and pull that harness aside and give you some direct access to the injectors here. Now the injectors will spin in place here, and there are locking retainers on the top here. So what we want to do is release those locking retainers and pull the injector down and out. Now I'm just going to use a flathead screwdriver to go ahead and release the locking retainers on our injector. Here we go. Just pop that out. And we do have a little bit of fuel coming out of the fuel rail. Not a big issue. Just put a towel in there. Make sure you're working in a well-ventilated area. So there's your old injector. Now we want to swap over this retaining clip here. Now the retaining clip is open on one side and closed on the other. So I'm going to use a small pick. I'm going to go behind here, up against the injector, and just gently pry that off. And it'll slide off that easy. You're going to take your new injector. You're going to go ahead and line this up. Just press it on. You're going to hear it and feel it snap into place. Now we're going to go ahead and insert our new injector into the rail. We're going to give it a quick spray with some solvent on that O-ring, and then line this up and go ahead and push that into place. Now our injector is pressed in, our lock retainer is in place. And you're going to repeat this process for the other 3 if that's what you're going to do. In our case, we just had to replace this back one. Line up the injectors with the holes in the intake, and we're going to push this down inside. Now a little tip here is if you spray the O-rings with a little bit of spray solvent, they should pop right into the engine. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to line these up. Okay, all of our injectors are fully seated. At this point here, we're going to install our bolts onto the fuel rail. Install the bolts. Now when tightening down the fuel rail here, it doesn't have to be super tight. Once that bolt bottoms out, quarter turn. So what we're looking at is a snug, right there bottomed out, quarter turn. Just looking for a snug pressure there. Install your fuel injector harness. You're going to press those on. You're going to hear it and feel it click into place. We're going to secure our injector harness to the rail just by inserting the little plastic retainer buttons on here. And before we install our gasket, you want to go ahead and make sure that the intake is clean of any debris, any old gasket material, any oils, anything like that. So we're just going to use some solvent. You can use a rag, a towel, anything like that. Clean up the surface. Once that's clean, go ahead and put your gasket into place. Take your gasket, line that up, and press it down into place. On the bottom of our intake here, we want to do the same. Make sure that the surface is clean of any old gasket material. You're going to use some spray solvent and just work your way around each port. Now on the bottom side of our intake here, we do have a little bit of residual gasket material. I'm going to use a block of wood that has a flat surface on it with some 400 grit sandpaper. Now the reason why we're doing this here is that we want to make sure when we're going to clean off the surface that we get a nice even planing surface. We don't want to use our fingers in sand because our fingers will create grooves in the aluminum, and that's going to cause a problem creating air leaks and things like that. So if you use a flat piece of wood and gently work on that, you want to make sure that you get rid of that old gasket material. And make sure that you have a nice clean mating surface for that new gasket. And you can see we have a nice clean mating surface. We're going to do this for the other ports, make sure that everything is clean. Then we're going to go ahead and install this. Now at this point we can bring our intake over. I did remove the bolts from it. Lower this down into position. And what we're going to want to do is bring our ignition wires up around the back here. Position our intake. It'll lock into place there. There it is. Let's go ahead and drop our bolts down into place. Once we have the bolts lowered down into place, I'm going to go ahead and get those started a few threads. Now I'm just going to run these bolts down just until they bottom out. We are not tightening these. Gently running them down until they're seated. Now we want to go ahead and torque our intake here. And there's going to be a particular pattern here counting out through the 12. I'm going to start with this one here. Now this is going to get torqued to 89 inch-pounds or 7.4 foot-pounds. Two. Three. Four. Five. Six. Seven. Eight. 9, 10, 11, 12. Now we're not done with just the torque specifications there on each bolt. Now we need to go back and start over through 1 through 12, and we need to tighten each bolt an additional quarter turn. One. Two. Three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. We're going to install our fuel line, line this up. I'm going to push this in. Now sometimes if that's stuck a little bit, we're going to spray a little bit of solvent on that. And push that in. You're going to hear it and feel it snap on. Don't forget your lock here. Snap that into place. Now onto the top of the intake, we had installed these bolts here. The reason why we removed this bracket here was we weren't able to get to the intake bolts over there. So we went ahead and removed this. Install the bracket. Once that bolt bottoms out, just a little bit more, want to make that snug. Bottomed out, snug. On the back side of the intake, go ahead and get those retainers pushed into the back side of the intake manifold. The passenger side is done. Go ahead and do that for the driver's side. On the back side of the throttle body, install those vacuum hose. Push that until it's fully seated. Along the top, we have this little vacuum port here. Install that there. We have our ignition wires here. Don't forget to push those little retainers back into the intake. We have our throttle body connection right here. I'm going to line this up, push that on. I'm going to hear it and feel it snap into place. Install a harness on the back side here. Line that up. You can hear that and feel it snap into place. Install your vacuum hoses. Now I want to install our bracket onto the front side of our intake. Make sure you get these bolts started by hand. And then go ahead and snug them down. Once that bolt bottoms out, snug it down. Once again, it doesn't have to be super tight. You just want to make sure that that's not going to come out. Over tightening can damage that intake. Once that's bottomed out, a little more. Check all of your other related vacuum ports and connections. Make sure everything is on there snug. Install the vacuum ports on the driver's side of the intake. And install your PCV hose here. Pops into the valve cover port right behind the oil fill. And then install the upper portion to the intake. Let's go ahead and install our coil as well as the vacuum port on the back side here. So we're just going to put this over on our intake. Push it on. Now we're just going to use our pliers and move that clamp down in a position. Now when we go to install this here, we want to make sure that we get this hooked up to the lower stud on the back side, as well as hooking up our electrical connector. Now we can go ahead and install that connector now if you want. Press it on, you can feel it and hear that one snap into place. Good, install the stud here. Feed that through the bottom port. And put that stud into the intake. I'm going to go ahead and get that lower stud started here. Once that's started, I'm going to go ahead and get the two upper ones into place. Use your 7mm socket and extension to go ahead and snug these down. Install your cables. The barrel style goes on the inboard portion. Just basically push that in, snap it in. Now you have your barrel end right here. We want to rotate up this here. Gonna feed it in. And then the cable will line right up and release the throttle. And this side here, feed that through. Go ahead, push that in, snap it in. And this side here will literally just snap onto this stud. So there's the opening on the bottom here. You're going to flip that over, push it right on top, and just push down. Both cables are now installed. Install your air intake tube. Make sure it's fully seated on both sections. Tighten down your hose clamps. And on the back here, we have one more vacuum hose. Line that up and push that in. Now at this point, you want to go ahead, hop into the car. You want to start the car and come on out and take a look, inspect all of your injectors that you had replaced as well as the ones you did not, and check for any type of fuel leaks. If there is a fuel leak, you'll have to pop this off again and replace or address any injector issues that you have, or oil or O-ring seating issues. If everything is nice and dry, go ahead and take the vehicle for road test. At that point there, you're all set.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.